Hey folks, we're going to go live with Brian Brushwood here in just a second. Just wanted to hop on and say hey. Wanted to explain to you that this is a live stream of a produced show. We're going to have flubs, we're going to have dubs. I'm going to stop and start and, stumble all over my words. If you want the edited version, it'll be out in a couple weeks over on the Where I'm From podcast YouTube channel. But past that, I'm really excited to talk to Brian. So we're going to play this quick intro I created to tell you who Brian is, and then we'll get right into it. Welcome to Where I'm From, the podcast that proves no matter how far you go, you'll always keep a little piece of home with you. I'm Bill Meeks. This week, bizarre magician and YouTube host Brian Brushwood joins me to talk about where he's from, Katy, Texas. Flip on your Friday night lights, folks. Yeehaw! You might know Brian Brushwood from his Revision 3 Discovery web series Scam School, or the follow-up Scam Nation.
Welcome to the show that keeps your wallet full and your liver begging for mercy. Scam School, the only show dedicated to social engineering at the bar and on the street. I'm your host, Brian Brushwood, and
He also co-hosts The Modern Rogue with his pal Jason Murphy, and the comedy podcast Great Night with his other buddy, Justin Robert Young. But before Brian became a titan of YouTube, he got his start in a little town south of Houston called Katy. Now, this should be pretty interesting. You see, I was born and raised in Katy for most of the first decade of my life. While I have plenty of stories from that time, and I'm sure a couple of them will come out here, I don't really remember that much about Katy. Now, Brian, he lived there until he was a teenager in the 80s, so I'm excited to get a more mature perspective on the town I grew up in. Let's talk to Brian. And welcome to Where I'm From, Mr. Brian Brushwood. How you doing today, sir?
Bill Meeks, am I confused, or is it almost 10 years to the month that you and I were on the other half of the planet while an international fraud was perpetrated upon the literary community, and I spent most of the night after appearing in front of more people live than watched the Super Bowl, and you and I sat in a hotel in Indonesia, and I gave you like a full-on TED Talk, pump you up success seminar. Am I imagining this, or is this our real life?
That couldn't have been 10 years ago, man, because I had a 4-year-old then and I have a 14-year-old. Oh shit. It's been a decade. Yeah, people who watched the intro, they actually saw a couple clips from our trip to Jakarta, Indonesia.
What a trip that was, man. And I'm so thankful because that was at a time when we were just taking over some of the production aspects of Scam School. And I just needed somebody who could run a camera, and just out of nowhere, I'm like, Bill Meeks, you want to go to Indonesia?
And I was like, yeah, sure.
Which, by the way, speaks to your spirit of adventure and your ability to say, why not? Let's give it a try.
I am very much infused with that sort of like Mickey Rooney, let's put on a show thing. Like if someone's like, hey, show up and do something for me, I'm there pretty much 100% of the time unless I have other commitments.
And I could tell that that's stuck with you because I've seen so many different projects that you've been putting out, and it's so fun. I don't know. I'm very, very pleased that it sounds like that moment was a precious moment for both of us.
Oh, absolutely. That moment definitely set me on a path because before that, I hadn't really done podcasting consistently before. I had never written much of anything that I tried to put out in the world besides like little essays about how I was a little emo kid, and since then, I've written books. I've done several successful podcasts. Hopefully this one will be one soon.
Well, good to know that I'm part of the cream of the crop.
Yeah. Well, it was really just like whose number do I have in my phone? I can talk. No, really, I'm excited to have you on to talk about Katy because Katy, I think I talked a little bit about this in the intro. I grew up there until I was 7, and then from like 8 to 11, something like that. We moved away to Virginia for a year, and I have fond memories of it, but I'm not completely sure if they're completely accurate based on things I've seen from Katy. Because basically what happened, I'll go ahead and get into it here. I was growing up in Texas, and then my grandma got sick, and we had to move to Wheeling, West Virginia, to be with the family. And I hated Wheeling, West Virginia. It was a really small town, not a lot going on, and I felt like Texas is like the big modern city. And I lived in Wheeling for several years. Ended up going to college up in West Liberty, West Virginia. And one day I turned on a news report, and it was a story out of Katy, Texas. And I was like, oh yeah, Katy, that really hip, cool place. And it was all this like racist, like, people screaming at each other, like throwing kegs at each other thing. And I was like, did I grow up in the town I thought I grew up in? And
well,
you were. I was going to say, you were a bit older when you lived there than me, so maybe you might have a little more insight.
Yeah, I would love to synchronize our timelines because you and I both had the curious experience of living in Katy, moving away, and then moving back to Katy. In my case, I lived in the same subdivision, just on a different street. And of course, when you're a kid, a year, 18 months feels like an eternity, but then you're an adult and you're like, you blink and that goes by.
Yeah.
So how old were you when you lived there, moved away, and moved back?
I was there from birth until 8. Then we moved away for a year and a half.
Yeah.
And then I came back from like 10 to 12. And then we
Okay.
moved away again. So yeah.
Yeah, so that's pretty close. When I was
I think we left there for good in 92.
That was right around the time I started dating. Boy, that's weird. To know that a young Bill Meeks was moving away just as I was about to touch a boobie.
Yeah, that little fat kid you were picking on back then, that was me, Brian.
Well, so in my case, we lived in I was born in California, and you want to talk about like just as you were thinking that moving to Texas was like moving to the big city. I was only 5.5 when I found out that we were moving to Houston the first time. This is North Houston, and I knew enough at 5.5 to know that that's where hillbillies live. Then we moved away to Colorado, and then we moved back for the first time to Katy. And then I moved overseas to Norway for a year and a half, and then came back. So my primary time in Katy was, I think, from roughly third grade through the beginning of 7th, and then we moved away, and then I was there for the tail end of 8th grade and through high school. But during that time, it was really wild. On a Brian story timeline, what I remember is that break in the middle of puberty was like a sorting hat, and I didn't have to be there for it. So I was off in Norway, and then I came back, and all of a sudden, some people were a foot taller than me and had deep voices and beards. Other people were smoking. But in the meantime, I loved how many of the landmarks were familiar, and I'm so glad that we moved back to the same neighborhood. Even at the age of 14, like we couldn't live in the school district that I wanted to live in or wanted to go to school in. So what mom did while we were in temporary housing was she bought us bikes for Christmas, and we biked 3.5 miles. Like,
oh, wow.
I mean, at the time I was stoked because, oh my God, we get to bike like all the way from Fry Road down to Mason Road to go to West Memorial Junior High and all that stuff. And now I'm stoked because, oh my God, I get to be one of those old fogies who talks about how they used to bike 3.5, 4 miles to school every day. It was epic.
I would say that living in Katy was probably my biggest length of time. Like, I was like really into biking too. We were only allowed, because I was so young, we were only really allowed to go around the block, but I would circle that block like all afternoon. Actually, come to think of it, one time me and my sister were doing that, and I never got confirmation or not if this actually happened or not, but my sister wanted to go like 2 blocks. And this van pulled up, and she was like, Billy, that guy's trying to grab us. He's a stranger danger, run. And then we biked like 2 blocks, and we came back, and my parents were upset because we'd been gone. They ended up calling the cops because my sister kept going with the story, and I was supporting her. And then I think like 3 or 4 years later, she was like, that didn't actually happen. I just wanted to go like 2 blocks.
So, you were in which neighborhood? Because I was on the other side of I-10, now called the Katy Freeway.
Gosh, it's hard to remember. I know it was a couple blocks from the elementary school, and I think Wolf Estates was nearby. Like you could walk to Wolf Estates, maybe.
Wolf Estates. I think
it was like a subdivision.
I know that we bonded over the fact that I think both of us went to West Memorial Junior High. Is that right?
I did not go to high school because I was homeschooled, but I think I lived right by it. I think because there was the school like 2 or 3 blocks away from us.
Yeah. I do remember, before I had a license, we would just ride over the highway, over the overpass. Now I believe it's an underpass. And we would go to Musabel's Books, the local bookstore, and the only place that was carrying comic books. And Ed Knott, who I should probably look up and find out what he's up to.
I'll look him up and put a picture of him here if I find him.
Oh, goodness. Well, now I want to reconnect with him. While we were out in Norway, he would batch like 6 weeks, 8 weeks of comics and then send them all at once to us and write nice handwritten notes.
Yeah.
And so much, it's so wild to be now a full-on grown-up and... look, it's not a contest, but boy, am I glad that I banked on Marvel Comics back when I was in 8th grade. because it's a good time to have been a Marvel fan as a kid.
Me personally, I was DC, but don't hold that against me.
Right. Hey, you get television. We got the movies.
But I got the CW television, which isn't that great.
It's a lot of fun. Although now you have the real prize. You have James Gunn, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We took him. He's ours now. The thing is, though, like when I was living in Texas, I wasn't that into comic books. That kind of came a little later. I was really into, and I don't know if you were at all, baseball cards. Like I wasn't into the game, but I was really into collecting like Donruss, Upper Deck, Topps baseball cards.
I have to admit that, again, what a great time to be an adult and to have money. And because I used to collect Marvel trading cards. And now, as we record this, Marvel Snap is the hot new collectible card game on mobile devices. Only now I'm a grown-up adult and nobody can tell me not to spend $100 at a time on it.
It's almost like marketers are targeting our nostalgia.
I'm okay. I'm here for it. I'm 100% here for it.
All right, Brian. Well, I have some questions I prepared about Katy here for you.
Okay.
First of all, when I think about Katy, it's very much for me connected to church. And Katy also used to be known as the city of churches. And when I lived there, it felt like everyone went to church, partially because some of the only socialization I got was at church. But I was wondering if you went to church, and if not, did it hurt you socially?
Oh no, I definitely did. I went to United Methodist, First United Methodist, the one close to Williamsburg Settlement, and it was a foundational part of my early high school life. It was that good social opportunity to bond. It's interesting because I'm thankful for that experience, although. I myself have matured into what I like to think of as hardcore agnosticism, but
radical agnostic, yeah.
Radical agnostic. That's a great phrase. Okay, that's what I'm gonna do. It's like I'm gonna. Never mind. I just realized there's terms of service violations. If I make what might be deemed as credible threats, but it was a wonderful experience, and. It confused me when I started having kids of my own, where it's like I think about where I am in my personal interest in various faiths, and I think about how much value I got out of it, and I didn't know whether or not to push or allow the opportunity for my kids or whatever. And so we kind of have a spread where some of the kids were involved in youth programs, and others were not. But I don't know what the right answer there is.
Yeah, mine my kids, my rule was always going to be we won't expose them to church at all until they can do algebra, because that's like the right combination of concrete and like abstract thinking to maybe handle religion. And by the time we got to that point, none of them were very much interested.
And that's the problem, right? Is if what you want is to have them plugged into a, traditional values, although religiously themed way to interact with locals. And again, Katy was pretty much like, everybody went to church, as you mentioned.
The city of churches. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer in that, because it's like, I did not send my kids to, or the kids that went to youth programs, I was not sending them there to indoctrinate them or to have them, adopt certain values. I was sending them there so they could have an opportunity to socialize and to...
Yeah, for community. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's actually one thing I kind of feel like I've kind of missed with my kids on is that lack of community. Because, I mean, they have friends from school. They go out and do things with them, but there's not like someplace we go every week or a couple times a week where we see the same big group of people or anything. And go ahead.
So when one of our kids was an infant, Bonnie pointed out that she had read that, look, your job as a parent is not to make them eat their vegetables. Your job, because their bodies will get hungry for certain vegetables if they are deficient in certain nutrients or minerals or what have you. That's part of the reason that we have weird cravings for particular foods at times. So your obligation as a parent is simply to set the opportunity in front of them. And if they feel like there's something in there they need, then they can take from it.
Yeah, I think the thing is like I grew up in a Baptist church, so this was probably a bit more apparent there, but they tend to like really hyper focus on the kids because they're so like malleable, and you can like convince them of certain truths that you believe in before they have a chance to critically think about it. And
and again, I don't want to make it a bag on thing, but it sounds like the fact that you were homeschooled, were you homeschooled for religious reasons?
100%, absolutely. When I was in first grade, they were going to start doing like basic like sex ed, human anatomy stuff in second grade. And my mom was like, okay, we're pulling them out and, we're doing the religious thing, a Becca books and all that.
Yeah. In that regard, I guess I air quotes lucked out. I don't know who's lucky and who's not, but I remember my friend Justin saying that, Methodists are a 6-pack away from atheists.
Absolutely. Because my grandma Meeks was a Methodist actually. And she didn't really care at all. And like, I would go up to Wadsworth, Ohio and spend a week with her every summer. And about halfway through the week, she would start dogging on how kind of militant Baptist my parents were, and like, you need to let people live, and you need to watch films that have cursing in them and things like that. You need to grow, which is why I always loved visiting my grandma Meeks so much.
All right, what else you got?
What else do I have? Okay, so I was wondering if your job is like part-time magician, part-time YouTuber, sometimes they intersect. I was wondering if you were interested in magic at a young age, and were there any resources in Katy or Houston that helped an aspiring magician like you?
I went through 2 waves. When I was 8 years old, my mom got me a magic kit, the Siegfried and Roy 200-in-1 magic set. Should probably, that's the kind of thing that around my age I should hunt down on eBay and find and relive that moment. But it was something that came and went, and then it wasn't my serious interest didn't happen until right before I went to college. A friend of mine, Gordon, showed me a magic trick outside of the Mason Park 8 cinema that we worked at, a Cinemark theater. And it was late one night, and we were swapping, I know this trick, I know that trick, cool. And he showed one that genuinely fooled me. I was like, okay, cool. How was that one done? And then he made the mistake of saying, no, this one's too good. And then that's what led me to 3 days later here in Austin to go up to the only magic shop in town, a little place that was run out of a garage north of Austin, where I had to walk a mile and a half after taking 2 buses. And I'm still learning it out of spite to show Gordon what's what.
Wait, because I remember when I was a kid, there were a lot of like weird businesses that people ran out of their garages. Like, like barber shops and like also, you don't see that very much anymore.
Uh, I think they're there. I think you and I are just in a different place in life where we
That might
don't
be
see
true.
them very often.
Where we don't feel like giving the guy in his garage $10 to maybe cut our hair. Well, maybe not.
Maybe, yeah.
No, that's fun though. Like, you mentioned the theater there. I know you worked at the movie theater in Katy. I personally went there a few times. I saw like Home Alone there, Kindergarten Cop there, to give you an idea of the time frame. What was it like working as a movie theater at a movie theater as a teenager? Because I'm sure like there were probably all sorts of like social things going on intermixed with that.
Oh yeah, and I loved it. I loved the experience. I loved the idea that there's this ladder. You start in concessions, you work your way to box office, or you do usher stuff, you do box office, and then if you really had what it takes, you got to be a projectionist. And there were legends of certain projectionists. To give you a time frame of where I was. Beethoven 2, I think, and Basic Instinct were out
Gotcha.
at roughly the same time. And one projectionist, this is back when films would be on giant platters that would be rolling around. So as certain scenes came in, if you noticed that there was something that needed to be spliced out, you could put a foam brick in there that would give you enough loose area to clip out something and tape it back together. And there's one particular infamous scene in Basic Instinct, and this guy injected 3 frames of a dog close-up looking at the camera panting at that exact moment. And so allegedly everybody in the theater would run up, gather around, and then while people are watching this highly sexually charged scene in Basic Instinct, and then all of a sudden you just see a dog going, and everybody would lose it up in the booth.
That's like a reverse Fight Club, because wasn't it like they
Yes,
edited a penis into a otherwise innocent scene?
As a matter of fact, like when I saw Fight Club, I was like, "Holy cow! This is right on the nose."
What kind of perks did you get as a theater employee back then? Did you get free popcorn? Did you get to come in on your off day and watch all the new movies? Or
Yes to both, but the popcorn was the big one. Like everybody was super excited the first time that they took an entire trash bag full of the rest of the popcorn home. Then it took 2 weeks for them to get through it, and then they were medium excited the second time.
Yeah, there's a threshold with popcorn to where it's like, oh, that's good. Oh, that's really good. Oh, that's the best thing I've ever had. And then I never want to see it again. I'm sure with a trash bag full, you'd get to that point pretty darn quickly.
Yeah, I remember one guy said, "Oh yeah, we're about to run a batch of atomic popcorn." I was like, "What's that?" He's like, "Well, you know that button that you press that does the predisposed, the pre-measured amount of hot golden flavoring oil. We just do
Pure
that.
lard, yeah."
Yeah, exactly. Then we press it again. And so just this nuclear orange radioactive popcorn would come out.
More butter than corn.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice. Okay, so you were back and forth in Katy. Something I always like to ask people, though, teachers have a really profound effect on us and kind of sometimes set us off in a direction. Did you have any teachers that had a profound effect on you and Katy?
A number of them. And I wish I had thought about this before we started recording, because I would make sure to get their names right. But there was one character. When I took calculus, you would expect that you would have things like books and calculators. We had nothing. We had we were told day one, yeah, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to take you through each lesson on the board. You're going to write notes. You only have your notes to work from, and no calculators. Your answers can all be expressed in radians, and there's no need for decimal points. And it was a trip, man. And what happened was that AP calculus class not only got me through calculus 1, but all of calculus. Like I tested out of Calculus 1. And then when I went to Calculus 2 at University of Texas, I was confused. I was like, what is this? This is forever ago stuff. Okay. And so we practically had almost a full year of calculus that we tested out of.
So kind of with calculus, you were running with ankle weights on, and then eventually you lost the weights, and you were like, "Oh, this is easy. This is easy."
Or as I think about it, because this actually happened, I was on the swim team at Williamsburg Settlement neighborhood, and we did drills where we would swim in blue jeans, and then you got to take the blue jeans off. You could swim much faster.
You said Williamsburg Settlement. That sounds vaguely familiar. So was it like a public pool that was there?
Yeah, it was the local neighborhood pool. There was Williamsburg Settlement. There was Williamsburg Colony. There was Williamsburg, I want to say Hamlet. But they had a number of different divisions.
This all sounds very familiar. That might have been the pool I almost drowned in when I was 3. Come to think of it. Yeah, my stepbrother didn't realize I couldn't swim, and I was like, "Oh, I'm going to go to the deep end." And I was down there for probably about 20, 30 seconds before someone found me.
There was kind of an epic scene of sharks and minnows in that deep end. Like we had the rule where you were allowed to not get caught for sharks and minnows as long as you were running your hands across the bottom of the deep end. So if your breath was good enough, you were able to just crab walk your way across the deep end back and forth the entire time. And eventually everybody was sharks except for you. And you were a crab.
That seems like it would be difficult though, because I mean, I don't know about you, but my technique to like kind of go down in the water is to let breath out. And I don't know like how long I could stay under there for
well, and of course, when you're a kid nowadays, I don't want to speak for you, but I'll speak for myself. I have a little fat is lighter than water, and when you're a kid, you're built like a brick, and you just sink right down.
See, I was a bit heavier when I was a kid. I think my heaviest was 350. So
what?
Yeah, I had to when I went swimming, I always wore the shirt. I was the kid in the fat kid in the shirt that would like stick to me when I got out of the water and show my moobs off and everything. But
that's so I never would have guessed that. That's incredible.
Oh yeah, man. Like I was it was kind of like, and this kind of ties back to Katy too. I was homeschooled, which means I didn't get out very much. My mom didn't really care that much about the schooling aspect. She cared more about the control. So she would like leave for the day and we'd be there with all the groceries. So I'd have microwave burritos, Doritos, all this stuff. And, don't want to say anything too offensive about her because I don't really talk to her anymore. But she wasn't exactly fit either. So I think I probably picked up a lot of those habits from her too.
It's a remarkable transposition or transformation. I never would have suspected.
Thank you. I was like 350 until I went to high school. Then I dropped 100 pounds in a year because I was walking, I was socializing. And then I think I dropped the rest down to where I am now, which is like around 180, 190, depending on the day, when I was in college, because I was doing a lot of theater, and for theater, you have to be in shape and you have to be, good breath control and everything. And I also smoked a lot of weed in college, so that I had that working against me. So, I was like,
to say that's not normally associated with weight loss.
Yeah. The weird thing, Brian, I feel comfortable saying this because I live in California and it's legal here. I've never gotten the munchies. Like I get like the opposite of the munchies to where like it's like an appetite suppressant for me. I don't know if I'm just like backwards wired or something, but
whatever it is, it's working.
Thank you. Okay. So, we're already talking about it a little bit. I was kind of a shut-in as a homeschooler. I really only got to socialize with other homeschoolers and people from church. I think I had like 2 like normal friends, Eddie and Robert, that lived next door, but it really didn't give me a sense of what kids were like in the area. What did normal kids in Katy do for fun? We just had, lock-ins and shit.
I suppose to anybody younger than me, this is interesting. To anybody older than me, it's obvious, but fight. We would just find excuses to scrap and meet up at the bayou. And I only got in one like real fight, but even then, it's like, I mean, I don't know how much damage can one leaf do to another leaf. Like, kids are made of nothing.
Well, why don't we drill in on that fight a little bit? Just because, it's probably far enough in the past, there's not a lot of emotion attached to it. Like, what was the conflict?
Oh, in this case, it was me trying to stand up for my brother, and he was 2 grades behind. So I had the brilliant idea that, well, I mean, I could beat up Jay all day long. I could certainly beat up 2 of Jay's peers at once.
Yeah, not quite doing the math, probably.
Yeah, it turns out I couldn't. But again, it's like, I went home with like a torn shirt, and that's about it. Most of my memories are of doing stuff like taking BB guns back when, taking firearms was a fine thing to do and walk around. And shooting stuff, putting silver dollars and pennies on train tracks. I mean, I sound like a great grandparent right now.
And then we walked uphill both ways in the snow, even though it was Texas.
I mean, it's all real stuff.
Actually, speaking of that, I think I remember one winter where it actually did briefly snow and everyone freaked out. Do you have any memories of snow in Texas?
Yeah, a couple of dustings, but remember, before I went to Katy, I lived in Colorado. So I was just like, snow was just like, hooray, I'm kind of seeing that old friend here.
Yeah, so it wasn't like a big impact for you or anything. Well, I know when I lived in Atlanta, because they're not very much used to snow, anytime it snowed, it was like a nor'easter, 7-foot blizzard up in the Northeast. Like, you couldn't go anywhere or do anything because they don't have any ways to treat the roads or anything like that. Power went out everywhere.
Well, and that is one of the things I wish more people understood about Texas. Everybody up north rolls their eyes saying, like, it's just snow, guys. It's like, yes, says the people with infrastructure and salt dispersal and sand dispersal and all of those things. And an entire populace trained on how to drive when there's snow.
Yeah.
In Texas, like, no, it's lethal. Like, I think when I moved to Austin, I think my second year here, I saw 20 car crashes in one day.
Wow.
And it was not because everybody's dumb. It's just because, there's only so much preparation you can have, and there's so much infrastructure that's needed to prepare for it.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, even if you have all the infrastructure in the road and you can salt the roads and everything, you still have to have people who know how to drive in the snow on those roads for it to be safe. It can be very, very dicey. Okay,
Yeah.
So we talked about this a little bit, but I was wondering, were there any like really big outlets for geeks in Katy? Computer clubs, comic book shops, stuff like that?
I mean, definitely Musabel's Books was the comic shop. I think later there was another one, but I never happened to go to it. Computer clubs, I didn't have much. There was a little bit of kind of a sneakernet scene. When I had an Apple IIe, there was another neighbor kid whose older brother was like deep into the I guess we'll say hacker scene. But they would be trading in just by swapping floppies. So it's like all of the early games that I played were all pirated copies of everything. And so
you copied that floppy.
Yes, exactly. Which made it a bit awkward when later I became friends with Richard Garriott, and I'm like, I played pirated copies of your games as a kid.
Well, piracy was a little different back then. Like, I remember there was like a video store, because I had a Commodore 64 when I lived in Katy, and there was a video store you could go into, and you could pay them, I think, like $2 to duplicate. They had like hundreds of discs of different programs, and you could pay them $2 to get a copy. And it
100% believe that. And by the time I went to college, they had gotten a little bit more sophisticated. There's a place called Floppy Joe's here in Austin, where technically what you would do is you would, air quotes, buy the software for $70 on your credit card, and then you would return it minus a $5 processing fee the following day. And hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah. One of those workarounds where it's not really breaking the rules, but it's kind of breaking the rules, I guess.
Totally breaking. Come on. Yeah.
So, we did talk a little bit at the beginning. I did go back to Katy briefly last summer. I know you're a little closer. You've probably gotten back a bit more often than I have, once in 20 years or something. When you go back, what kind of sticks out to you is what has changed the most in Katy since you were growing up there?
I mean, everything. And it's not the changes that weird me out. It's the tiny things that are the same. It's like you see a strip mall that you would never recognize, and then there's one still there store, or the 30-year-old Mason Village sign is still there, or what have you. It was bizarre.
So it's more about the remnants of the past that haven't got knocked out yet than it is about the new
100%,
growth.
100%.
Yeah, Katy's because when I was growing up there, it felt very much like a small town next to a big city. And going back there last summer, it felt almost just like an extension or a suburb of Houston versus. It's
the beginning of Houston, and at the time, you're right. Katy proper was a separate town, not anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We didn't drive around and explore too much. There's probably still a ton of farmland around there and stuff, but I know there was farmland closer to town than there was when I was back there last summer.
Yeah.
All right, let's see here. Here. I'm going to take a drink. This is part of that loosey-goosey stuff I mentioned at the beginning of the stream,
also, I'm definitely making Justin wait, so I'm short on time.
Okay, cool. Okay, we'll keep going then. All right. So, all right, let's see here. Okay, well, we're going to do our first game then, Brian. This is called the Wheel of Anecdotes. I'm going to give you a suggestion, and your challenge is to respond with a short anecdote from Katy or the Houston area. The shorter, the better. Make sense?
Ready.
Okay. Crawdad.
Found him in the bayou. Not a crawdad, but there was a time I saw what looked like a big old dead fish, and I shot it with a BB gun. That fish was not dead. It was just dying. And boy, did it not like getting shot with a BB gun as it was running, because there would be things would get dry and then they get wet and then they get dry again. Anyway, I was a bad kid.
All right. Astrodome.
Ooh, so many good memories of the Astrodome. Not least among which was the excitement of watching whichever the Bad News Bears movies had them play at the Astrodome. But I remember going to the rodeo there. I remember all their ridiculous over-the-top signage. I remember hearing that earworm of a song Houston Oilers played every time they scored a touchdown. Wow, you just took me back.
Yeah, I only went there to see the Astros play. I know Frosted Flakes had a deal where you got a certain number of coupons off the back and then you got free baseball tickets. And so I remember going there a couple times. The thing is, I was really big into baseball cards. I realized going to those games, I wasn't really a big fan of the game. I was more about the collectibles. Okay, let's see. Astro World.
Astro World is the greatest, best place ever. And there's a wonderful documentary on it from Defunct Land where they talk about how great it was and how great it aspired to be, and about how the realities of basically they just made it too cheap, too easy, and not special enough to where all of a sudden it became scary and kind of crimey. They also had a concert venue in the back area where when my buddy saw Milli Vanilli and I saw a couple of concerts. Definitely go watch that documentary from Defunct Land.
What were your two top rides at Astro World?
Skyscreamer was the jam, and Grease Lightning.
See, I was pretty partial to the Texas Cyclone and the Ultra Twister. Ultra Twister was actually my first coaster I ever went on.
Oh my God. Ultra Twister was the one that came out when I was in high school, and I was like, oof, they're really reaching now, aren't they?
See, I don't know. I love it. It was only 90 feet tall, but then it just like it dropped and
Did
it kept
that cool
you spinning
spiral
the
thing, yeah.
spiral and then backwards spiral. I would love to go on. I know there's a few other coasters out like that. If you know of an Ultra Twister coaster in the United States, let me know, Bill at BillMeeks.com. Okay, spicy.
Spicy. The flavor?
Yeah.
I don't have many memories of spicy anything. However, when I was a kid, when I lived in Katy, I grew up liking very bland foods, and it was only after I learned to eat fire that I would start trying spicy foods.
Oh, so you built up a tolerance from fire, and now you can handle hot sauce.
Mainly, I just acknowledge that it's like, oh, it'll be too embarrassing to be the guy who eats fire but is afraid of salsa.
All right, and this was one from the text you sent me this morning, Mason Road.
Yeah, dude. Nowadays, my goodness, I was thinking about how horrified most adult parents would be to just let their 12-year-olds just unleashed on bikes going anywhere they want. And even then, it's like it's fun to see kind of the confusion among the younger crowds when you're watching Stranger Things and you're like, wait, they would just ride their bikes everywhere? It's like, yeah, dude, we all had cars. They were called bikes. It was great.
Yeah, you didn't have to bum rides off your parents. You could just, take the Shoe Leather Express.
Yeah.
All right, and we're going to wrap up with, and this was the state slogan when I lived there. They might have changed it now, but it's like a whole other country.
Yeah. Whoa. You're right. I remember that. Was that a Katy thing or a Texas thing or what?
It was a Texas thing. It was because they always had the ads for the guidebook that you could call and order with all the things to do in Texas, and
Texas.
It always
it's
ended
like
with
a whole other country.
Yep, like
Right.
a cowboy. Yeah.
Well, and weirdly, that niche has been supplanted with the whole "Don't mess with Texas" sentiment, which people who didn't grow up in Texas may not know was the anti-littering campaign. That's what it was, and then it became this sort of like cultural gestalt thing.
It became the "I'm an asshole but deal with it" kind of motto.
You know what? As long as you, yeah. Well, and that was one of the things that they did in that campaign that was so smart is they would have tough guys, these big burly football players getting really upset at people who would mess with Texas. They pick up a beer can and be like, I hate when people mess with Texas.
Yeah. And I think that about does it for the game. Brian, congratulations. You won the game.
Yay!
The prize is absolutely nothing. You have to talk to me for about 10 or 12 more minutes.
Oh, no. It's a punishment.
All right, but real quick before we get back into talking about Katy and wrapping up our conversation about Katy, we do have a quick ad to play. So we're going to play an ad from our sponsor, and then we'll be right back. Where I'm From is brought to you by Stream Studio. That's STREANN Studio, the web app that puts you in charge of the live show. Stream Studio allows you to take your streaming game to the next level by allowing you to stream to multiple platforms at once. If you want to go to Twitch, if you want to go to YouTube, you can stream to all of those platforms at once, get feedback from your audience, and most importantly, it puts you in control of the show. Now, Stream Studio has several packages that work for just about any type of broadcaster. From the free plan, where you can stream with a watermark, all the way up to the gold plan, where you can have up to 8 guests. You can stream to as many social platforms as you want. You can get a web link to share your show with external audiences, and you can even get an iframe so you can embed your live stream show directly into your website. Hey, I love Stream Studio so much, I'm using it to produce this show. I want to thank Stream Studio for supporting Where I'm From, and you can give this fantastic software a spin and support Where I'm From at the same time. Just head over to our website at billmeeks.com/whereimfrom and click on the Stream Studio banner so they know we sent you their way. And we want to thank Stream Studio for sponsoring Where I'm From. So, Brian, what ultimately took you away from Katy the last time?
Graduation and also nowhere to go back to. Once I graduated, my parents my dad was in the petroleum biz. So that's what got us moving all around and got us out to Norway, got us back to Katy.
Yeah.
And then the moment I went to college, that's when they opened up new ventures off the coast of Venezuela. So while I was off at college, we went down and got to visit Venezuela, Caracas and Puerto La Cruz. This is before Chavez came in. And it's wild to read stories. And it's like, I know that place. It's really bizarre.
Yeah. Now, I mentioned to you a little bit earlier that experience I had watching a news report out of Katy, and realizing that maybe it wasn't like the golden urban environment I thought it was. Like, what was your read on like the culture of Katy and like in terms of, racial conflicts and that sort of thing growing up there? Because like I said, when I look back, it seemed very modern when I lived there. Looking back on it, it seemed backward to where I was even in West Virginia at the time.
At the time I grew up in Katy, it was, what's the word? White. It was very white. And in fact, in all of elementary school and even through high school, I could think of maybe 3 fellow students that were black. And it would not surprise me if the demographics have changed. But in a strange way, I don't know, race was not the concern. It was mainly status or what you were into, whether it was types of music or the way you dressed or that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because, there's a pretty big Mexican population for proximity reasons there. And, we had a lot of Mexican friends growing up, and it didn't, to me as a 3, 4, 5, 6-year-old, it didn't really seem like there was a lot of pushback from the environment or, from people from church for us hanging out with people like that. But then, you look back or you hear someone talk about it later on, and apparently like there were a lot of racist assholes like all around me. And I guess it's just our position. We never see that side of it.
And exactly. It's very, I mean, how could a child know what's going on around them? I mainly knew.
Ooh, still with us?
There we go. Am I back?
Okay. Yep, you're back.
Okay. If I had a beef with another kid, it was almost certainly over what Transformers they had and very little else.
Yeah, which is to be expected. And, to be fair, like any kid that I didn't go to school with or not go to school with, but go to church with or do like the homeschooling activities with, which was predominantly, white Christians and everything. Like, I just never really saw it. But I guess it was probably there, and I was too innocent to realize. So, Brian, I'll ask you one last question here. You're a man with a lot of stories. Anytime I say anything to you, you respond with a 5-minute anecdote. So what's your favorite Katy story?
What's funny is the mere way that you phrased that made me suspect, am I a robot? Am I an android designed to speak in 5-minute anecdotes?
You might very well be if it's not robotics, it's training.
Picking a favorite is always difficult, but
that's why I ask.
I do remember moving there as a kid. So we moved around a lot as a family. And in general, when a family moves, they tend to move to places that are being developed. So my entire life would be, we'd move into a neighborhood, power would go out regularly, cable would go out regularly. There was always construction sites to go play in. You could always steal scrap wood and make crazy projects out of it. And then around the time that place would get developed, we would move to another place where it would be the exact same thing. And those are some of my fondest memories of Katy. As a matter of fact, the very first day that we moved into our house, right across from the pool where you almost died, literally across the street on Hoyt Lane, I remember it was before the sod was put in, and my brother and I, like everything was sand, and my brother and I just started throwing sand at each other, and I'm sure we horrified all our new neighbors. While my mom was in there trying to make a good impression on the locals, Jay and I were like just wrestling each other down, grabbing mud, stuffing it down each other's underwear, and then finally we come walking in with these saggy, tighty whitey diapers filled with dirt, and we're like, hey, yeah, no, I have lots of really good memories of Katy.
That actually very much puts me in mind of a story of mine real quick, in that we had a garden, like a little vegetable garden on the side of our house that my mom was trying to get going. It failed miserably. She took off for like an afternoon, and me and my sisters decided it would be a really good idea to dig 2 deep holes and then tunnel in between them and fill it with water.
Yeah.
And by the time she came home, like we were all 3 just like this muddy mess. We had to get like sprayed down. It was a very Texas moment. We had to get like sprayed down with the garden hose outside before we could go in and actually clean up. But I do. That is one thing that I kind of took away from my time at Katy. I feel like I had a lot more outdoor adventures than I've had other places. Maybe that's the climate. Maybe it's just the nature of the beast. What do you think?
Part of it almost certainly is because adults don't have a lot of reason to put themselves in the unpleasant outside heat of Houston, Texas.
Yeah,
However,
yeah.
adults can tell kids, get the hell out of here. I'm watching my soaps.
Nice. All right, Brian. Well, I want to thank you again so much for joining me today. It's been great catching up. I hope it's not so long again before we catch up. Where can people follow you and all the crazy, amazing, wonderful stuff you do?
Just check out my Twitter.
Oh, man. Musk beat you to it. He cut it while we were on here.
Just check out World's Greatest Con. World's Greatest Con. Search for it wherever you listen to audio. I think you guys will like it quite a bit.
Yeah, and to be clear, World's Greatest Con is a nonfiction, season-based podcast about different big cons in history, right?
Yeah, we're demystifying history's greatest deceptions.
Excellent. I knew you'd have the tagline, Brian. All right. Well, I want to thank you so much again for joining me today. You guys out there watching, if you like the show, please consider going over to Apple Podcast or wherever you get a podcast and leaving us an honest review. It doesn't have to be 5 stars. I'd like it to be 5 stars. It could be 3 stars. Don't do it below 3 though. That's going to hurt our average. You can also find links to everything we do with the show, the podcast, the live YouTube videos, the edited YouTube videos, and contact information if you want to write in and respond to what we've said today at billmeeks.com/whereimfrom. Now, last but not least, I'd like to say, if you're watching this live, this won't be for the recorded people, but if you're watching this live and you're going home for Thanksgiving, I'd love for you to send me a video of where you're from and celebrating the holiday with your family. If you want to do that, just throw it in a Google Drive or a Dropbox and email it to me over at bill@billmeeks.com. Well, that does it for this week. Join us next time when I talk to somebody else about where they're from. See you soon.